The old Ravensbrook Asylum had stood abandoned for decades, a hulking mass of crumbling stone and broken windows on the outskirts of town. For as long as anyone could remember, it had been a place of whispered rumors and chilling tales. People said the building was cursed, haunted by the souls of those who had died there under mysterious circumstances. But for some reason, the town had never demolished it. They just let it rot, like a wound they refused to heal. It was late October when James and his friends, Sarah, Mike, and Emily, decided to explore the asylum. It was supposed to be a fun thrill, a way to kill time before Halloween. They had all heard the stories but didn't really believe them. Besides, they were young, restless, and eager for an adventure. "Come on, guys, it's just an old building," James said as they gathered at the rusted front gates. "Nothing's gonna happen. We'll be in and out before anyone knows." "Yeah, let's just get some pictures and call it a night," Sarah added, pulling out her phone. Her voice was steady, but the nervous glances she exchanged with Emily said otherwise. They pushed open the gate, the metal groaning in protest, and stepped into the overgrown courtyard. Weeds had claimed most of the ground, and vines crawled up the side of the building, as if trying to drag it back into the earth. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the scene, and the wind whistled softly through the broken windows. The front door was slightly ajar, and with a gentle push it swung open with a loud creak. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. Their footsteps echoed in the long, dark hallway, and every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. "Man, this place is creepy," Mike muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think it'd be this bad." James smirked, though he, too, felt uneasy. "It's just old. Let's go check out the main hall." They made their way through the maze of corridors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls were peeling, the floor littered with debris, and every few steps they would hear a strange sound, like distant footsteps or the faintest of whispers. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling as they turned a corner. "Probably just the wind," James said, though his grip on the flashlight tightened. But it wasn't the wind. As they entered the main hall, something felt wrong. The air was colder, and the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, almost like they were alive. In the center of the hall stood a large metal gurney, rusted and stained, as if it had been left behind in haste. And then there was the sound again, a faint scratching, like nails on stone, coming from somewhere beneath them. "Is there a basement?" Sarah asked, glancing nervously at the floor. "Yeah," James replied, his voice low. "There's supposed to be tunnels below the asylum where they kept the more dangerous patients." Emily's face went pale. "You don't think... It's just a sound," James said quickly, though his confidence was slipping. "Let's just take a few pictures and get out of here." But as they raised their phones, something unexpected happened. All their screens went dark, the cameras refusing to work. Sarah cursed, tapping at her phone furiously. "What the hell?" Mike shook his head, his face grim. "Mine's dead too." Before anyone could respond, there was a loud bang from the far end of the hall. They all spun around, flashlights flickering as the beam landed on the source. A door, which had been firmly shut when they entered, was now wide open. "I think we should leave," Emily whispered, taking a step back. "I agree," Sarah added quickly. James hesitated, but before he could speak, the scratching sound returned, louder now, coming from the direction of the open door. And then, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, sending a cloud of dust into the air. They ran. Panic set in as they sprinted through the narrow corridors, their flashlights flickering and casting wild, erratic shadows. The asylum seemed to twist around them, hallways stretching longer than they should, doors leading to places they hadn't come from. It was as if the building was shifting, trying to trap them. "Where's the exit?" Mike shouted, his voice rising in fear. "I don't know!" James yelled back, his heart pounding in his chest. "We should have hit the front door by now!" But no matter how fast they ran or which turns they took, they couldn't find the way out. It was as though the asylum was alive, keeping them within its crumbling walls. And then, without warning, the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed them whole, and for a moment, all they could hear was their own frantic breathing. Then the scratching returned, closer than ever, followed by a low, guttural whisper. "They never leave." James fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking. When the beam finally cut through the darkness, his heart nearly stopped. Standing just a few feet away at the end of the hall was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. "Run!" James screamed, pushing the others forward. They bolted, but the thing was faster. As they rounded a corner, Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground. When the others looked back, the figure was standing over her, its long, skeletal fingers wrapped around her throat. Without thinking, James grabbed Emily and Mike, pulling them down another corridor. They could hear Sarah's screams echoing through the asylum until, abruptly, they stopped. They didn't stop running until they burst through a door and stumbled into the cold night air. Gasping for breath, they looked back at the asylum, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. There was no sign of Sarah. We have to go back for her," Emily sobbed, but James shook his head. "She's gone." The three of them stood there, trembling, too terrified to move. And in the distance, from somewhere deep within the asylum, they heard it again. The scratching. And then, faintly, Sarah's voice. "Help me." When Laura first heard the stories, she dismissed them as nothing more than local folklore. Moving to a small town meant hearing strange superstitions, and the one about Harrow Woods was no different. The townspeople said the woods were haunted, and that anyone foolish enough to venture deep into the forest at night would never be seen again. "Just old legends," she told herself, unpacking her things in her new home. But as the days passed, Laura couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like a second skin. There was something about Harrow Woods that felt wrong. Her neighbors warned her not to go near the forest, especially after sunset. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived next door, was particularly adamant. "I've lived here my whole life," Mrs. Henderson had said in a hushed voice one evening. "People disappear in those woods. There's a reason we don't go near it, and you shouldn't either." Laura politely nodded but remained skeptical. She loved nature and enjoyed hiking, so the idea of a forbidden forest only fueled her curiosity. One chilly evening, despite the warnings, Laura decided to see for herself what was so terrifying about Harrow Woods. Armed with a flashlight, she ventured out at dusk. The path was overgrown, the thick canopy of trees above blocking out most of the fading sunlight. As she walked deeper into the woods, the air seemed to thicken, becoming heavier, almost oppressive. The wind, which had been gently rustling the leaves, became still. Her flashlight flickered. "Come on, don't do this," she muttered, smacking it. The light steadied, but the darkness around her felt more alive now, as if it were watching. For a moment, Laura considered turning back, but her pride wouldn't let her. She wasn't about to be scared off by some ghost stories. The further she went, the stranger things became. There were no sounds of animals, no birds, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, just silence. And then she heard it. A faint whisper carried on the wind. "Help me?" Laura froze. Her breath hitched, and she swung her flashlight around wildly, trying to find the source of the voice. It was soft, almost like a distant plea, but it sent a chill crawling down her spine. She told herself it was the wind, a trick of the mind. But then it came again, louder. "Please, help me!" Her heart raced as the voice grew closer, more desperate. It sounded like a woman, lost and afraid. Against her better judgment, Laura called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The only answer was the whisper, now circling her, as though the forest itself were speaking. "Come! Closer!" Laura's feet moved, though her mind screamed for her to stop. Something about the voice pulled at her, urging her deeper into the forest. She stumbled through the brush, branches clawing at her clothes and skin as the whisper grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the ground beneath her gave way, and she tumbled into a small ravine. Her flashlight flew from her hand, landing several feet away, the beam casting long, twisted shadows through the trees. Laura groaned and sat up, rubbing her sore ankle. She reached for the flashlight when she noticed something in the beam's path. something pale and human-shaped. Her blood turned to ice. Lying in the shadows was a body, a woman, her skin waxy and cold, eyes wide open in terror. Laura stumbled back, her breath coming in panicked gasps. The woman's lips were parted, as though she had been screaming when she died. But what sent terror coursing through Laura's veins was the fact that the woman looked just like her. Before Laura could comprehend what she was seeing, the whisper returned. But this time it wasn't soft or pleading. It was right behind her. She turned, her flashlight flickering weakly. Standing in the darkness was a figure cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It stood unnaturally still, as though it wasn't entirely human. "You should not have come." The voice was no longer that of a frightened woman, but something ancient, something malevolent. Laura's legs refused to move, paralyzed by fear as the figure took a step toward her. The ground beneath her feet felt as though it was pulling her down, sinking her into the earth. "You belong here now." The words echoed in her mind, louder than her own thoughts. The figure's face slowly became visible in the dim light, and what she saw made her scream. It was her face, twisted, decayed, a reflection of the body she had found moments before. Laura stumbled back, finally breaking free of her paralysis. She scrambled to her feet, her ankle throbbing in pain, and ran as fast as she could. The whispers chased her, growing louder, more frantic. The trees seemed to reach out, their branches curling like fingers trying to grab her. Her lungs burned, her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The whispers were right behind her, urging her to give in, to let the forest claim her. The edges of her vision darkened, and just as she thought she couldn't run any further, she burst out of the woods and into the clearing. The whispers stopped. Gasping for air, Laura collapsed to the ground, her body trembling. She turned to look back at the forest, but the trees stood silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But she knew. The forest had shown her its secret, its curse, and she had barely escaped. Laura never spoke of what she saw that night, but she never went near Harrow Woods again. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear faint whispers outside her window, calling her name, beckoning her to return. And she knew one day she wouldn't be able to resist, because the forest never let go of those it claimed.